So, liquidity preference theory. So, liquidity preference theory is made up of three components. Let's talk about the first one. So, consumers need money to pay for goods and services, which means that money passes from firms to factors of production to pay for the factor services supplied. So, the money demanded to finance the payments for goods and services is called the transactions demand for money. So, the first component is the transactions demand for money. Now, transactions demand for money depends on the equilibrium income. If your incomes rise, you're going to spend more and more on goods and services. It also depends on general price levels. If price levels rise, for the same goods and services, you now need more money to pay for goods and services. It also depends on wealth. If someone is wealthier, there's a greater chance of them spending more. Then we have what's called frequency of payments. So if transactions happen frequently, if let's say once every hour or once every 2 hours, you need more money to pay for those services, to pay for the goods and services. And finally, it also depends on interest rates, but interest rates and the transactions demand for money are inversely related. Because when interest rates rise, saving is far more attractive because you're going to get more returns on your on savings. Which is why when interest rates rise, the transactions demand for money falls. You lower your transactions, you lower your spending on goods and services. So that's one component. Let's call this T. Then we have what's called the precautionary. Denoted by P. Now, the demand for P depends on individuals, and basically it's more of a cushion kept against emergencies, right? Let's say you fall sick suddenly, and you need to have a small a stack of cash that you can use for emergency services. For businesses, there is a certain time lag. They make payments at the beginning of the month, but most businesses get the receipts of the sales at the end of the month. So, to carry on the operations during the month, to pay for the expenses and other debtors, there needs to be a cushion, a stack of cash kept to finance those emergencies, to finance the time lag. So basically, the precaution demand for money is depends on the number of expenditures that arise unexpectedly. Now again, it also depends on your equilibrium income. It depends on the price levels. If the price levels rise, you're going to get more cash in your wallet or in your purse for emergency situations. And it also depends on interest rates. But like the transactionary demand for money, this is also inversely related. Let me write this down again. This is the worst handwriting in the world. Inversely related. Now, the transactionary and precautionary demand for money is basically money used as a medium of exchange. So, we say that the demand for transactionary and precautionary makes up what we call the active balance of the liquidity preference theory. We call it an active balance because this money is used as a medium of exchange. Now after this, we have the final component, which is called speculative demand for money. Now, after the transactionary and precautionary needs, household may have some extra income left. Now, these households may decide whether they want to invest this income in bonds to get returns on their investment, or they want to keep it in their drawers. But interest rates fluctuate, and which means that the market prices of the interest-bearing non-money assets, or what we call bonds, also fluctuates. So say if at one extreme, if individuals hold all of their extra income in bonds, they earn extra interest on it. But at the same time, they're exposed to the risk of the fluctuating prices of these bonds, which means they could either lose all of their money or they could get a jackpot. Which is why individuals usually do not take either extreme positions. They hold part money, which means they hold part in the form of speculative money, which means this money is kept in their drawers, and they hold part in bonds, which means they diversify their holdings, that some proportion of the income is held in money, so this money will not be used for transactionary and precautionary needs. This will just be held in anticipation of a fall in the prices of bonds, so this money could be invested in bonds again. And some of this money will be invested in bonds, so as income rises, so will the desired money holdings will rise, and which means that the returns will rise. So in conclusion, money balances held in order to provide a hedge against the uncertainty inherent in fluctuating prices of other financial assets are called speculative balances. So the speculative balance makes up the idle balance of liquidity preference theory, which means money held in anticipation of a fall in prices of bonds, so they could invest in bonds later and get returns on it. So a part of remaining income will be invested in bonds, and the remaining constitutes the demand, the speculative demand for money. And since this is highly responsive to the interest rates, if I sketch it over here on the x-axis I have the quantity for money, and on the y-axis if I have the interest rates, and if I sketch the speculative demand for money, this will be a relatively elastic curve because it's highly responsive to changes in interest rates. Because as soon as interest rates fall, individuals will invest their leftover income, the speculative demand, the money held in their drawers in bonds. So if I combine all three, so the transactionary demand is inelastic to interest rates. This is your transactionary demand. The precautionary demand is also inelastic, but like we said, the speculative demand is relatively elastic. So if I combine all three to make the liquidity preference curve, let's draw a rough sketch. On the x-axis I have the quantity for money, on the y-axis I have the interest rate. So this is what it will look like. Where let me use a different color, where this portion is a transactionary and precautionary, basically the active balance, and this portion is speculative demand for money, the idle balance. So in the next video we'll talk about the supply of money, and then we'll talk about interest rate determination using the LP curve and the supply of money.